All right, here's a good one. I was saving it. I was like, oh, this looks really good. I'll save it for like when I record. So yeah, one of Australia's most chilling cases. The screenshot was saying like, well, no, I think I saw the first like 2 3 minutes, and yeah, it's twisted. You'll see. So yeah, enjoy.
As John Price finished work for the day, he quipped to his co-workers that if they didn't see him the next morning, it was because his girlfriend had killed him. His chest still bore a long scar from when his partner, Catherine Knight, had stabbed him with a butcher's knife, so he knew the kind of violent outbursts that she was capable of. His colleagues begged him not to go back to her, but John was afraid that if he didn't, she would do something to his children instead. When he failed to show up the following day, people started to worry. Had his prediction been correct? The police were called to his house, and when they noticed the blood smeared across his front door, they entered the property. What they found inside was a scene so sickening that even veteran detectives were left with PTSD and recurring nightmares. Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Today, we're looking at one of Australia's most shocking cases, the murder of John Price at the hands of Catherine Knight.
Pretty rare. You don't really see a lot of women killers, so. But I think like it is it like her she was brought up in that type of like household like so yeah.
So we're going to take a brief trip back and examine Catherine Knight's early life, as it's pretty important for understanding what she would later go on to do. Born 1955 at Tamworth Hospital in New South Wales, Catherine grew up in the small town of Morrie with her father Ken, her mother Barbara, and 5 siblings. Family life was rough, to say the least. Her father was a violent alcoholic who worked at the local slaughterhouse. He would apparently demand sex from his wife up to 10 times a day, and he would beat her senseless if she refused. With this backdrop of sex and violence, Catherine grew up. Throughout her childhood, she says that she was the victim of sexual abuse from her own brothers and physical abuse from her parents. This troubled upbringing manifested in Catherine's own behaviour. At school, she was a bully and she would assault other children. From a young age, she already gained a reputation for her sudden and unpredictable violent outbursts. When Catherine was 13, she and her family moved to the Australian town of Aberdeen. At the age of 15, she left school and she found work at a local clothes factory. This wasn't really what she wanted to do. Her dream was to follow in her father's footsteps and work at the local abattoir. By this time, her father, her twin sister, and her 2 older brothers all worked at the Aberdeen Meatworks, so it was seen as something of a family tradition to go into that line of work.
It's a red flag right there sort of. Like sure, processing plants where the animals are already dead, okay, like I actually worked there for a little bit. It is gross and disturbing, but at least they're already like dead and it but like the people that do the killings of those animals, those people are usually there's something really wrong with those people. Like and I've seen a couple crime documentaries where it was like, yeah, that was their job and then they turned out to be a killer.
At 16, she finally achieved her goal and she left the clothes factory to work at the abattoir as an offal cutter. Working at the slaughterhouse meant that Catherine got her own set of knives, which apparently was one of her most prized possessions, and she kept the blades razor sharp. Throughout her life, she would hang her knife set above the head of her bed. They were the last thing that she saw when she fell asleep at night, and the first thing she saw when she woke up. At the slaughterhouse, she met a man named David Kellett. He would go on to become her husband. Kellett would later describe how Kath was extremely violent towards him, but she had this sort of way of manipulating him into accepting it, usually with sexual favours. One minute she'd be smacking him round the head, beating him up over some trivial thing, and the next moment she'd be apologizing, buying him gifts, or coaxing him into bed to make up for it.
That's what my ex used to do. She was pretty abusive, like in every way, and she would just make it all better by like having sex and being all sexual, and then oh everything's okay, and then then next time she felt shitty, she could just treat me like shit and hit me and I buy her coffee, she throws it back in my face, boiling hot, shit like that. It's like, anyways, that's why I've been single for like 5 years because I've lost all hope in finding good people out there. But anyways.
At the age of 20, Catherine gave birth to her first daughter, Melissa Kellitz. The arrival of this new baby seemed to make Kath's violent mood swings even worse. This is a pattern that we'll see repeating again and again. Catherine's abuse towards David Kellett got worse and worse. After she tried to stab him with a broken beer bottle, David skipped town with another woman. By this point, he was convinced that Kath was going to kill him, so he just left a note telling her that he was leaving rather than giving her the news face to face. David's departure triggered a complete mental breakdown in Kath. She was found wandering the streets of Aberdeen with her daughter in one hand and a butcher's knife in the other. She was threatening to kill her baby. This led to a 2-week stay at St. Elmo's Psychiatric Hospital in Tamworth, where she was treated with antidepressants before being released to take care of her daughter. A few weeks
And like that mental hospital didn't help. It just made things worse, probably.
later, Kath abandoned her baby, Melissa, on some train tracks. The child was saved by a homeless man named Ted Abrams. He happened to be walking by moments before a train would have run over the child, and he saved her. Kath was later found by police. She was wandering the streets, swinging an axe around. She was in an extremely agitated state. She was readmitted to St. Elmo's. She was diagnosed with postnatal depression, and she was released shortly after. Days later, she had another psychotic episode. She went to the house of a co-worker named Margaret Macbeth. She slashed Margaret's face and then took Margaret and her family hostage. She forced them to drive her to a different town to try and search for her missing fella, David Kellett. Kath was later arrested when they stopped at a service station. She was found by police clutching one of Margaret's children and waving a knife around. She was sent to Morisset Hospital, which is a high-security psychiatric facility. There she was heavily sedated. A doctor who evaluated her wrote, "The girl has little insight into herself. She acts impulsively and violently when roused. She is both immature and intellectually unstable and seems to have little awareness of the consequences which might result from her irrational behavior."
That's like 95% of all people nowadays.
Eventually, Catherine was released from the hospital. By this time, David Kellett had come back and they'd rekindled their marriage. Their relationship was extremely volatile, and I'm going to skip over a lot of details here just so that the video isn't 10 hours long, but just to give you an idea of the sort of things that went on. When Catherine was 24 and pregnant with her second child, Natasha, her and David got into an argument, which ended with Catherine smashing him over the head with an iron saucepan, fracturing his skull. Whilst he was in hospital recovering, she burnt all of his clothes in a big pile inside the house. Another time, Kellett woke up in the middle of the night to find Kath kneeling on his chest and holding a butcher's knife to his throat. He said this was one of the scariest moments of his life, and it took a long time for him to talk her down. He was sure that she was going to kill him. As can be expected, this marriage broke down and they eventually divorced after Kath fled one night, taking the kids and all of David's possessions with her. Her next serious relationship was with a man named David Saunders. This began in 1986. It seemed to be going okay at first until Kath's mother suddenly died. After this, Catherine went into a downward spiral of depression and paranoia as she started accusing Dave of cheating on her with various women. This culminated one day with Kath slitting the throat of one of Dave's dingo puppies in front of him. Dave's friends noticed that each week he'd seem to have some new bruise or cut from Kath flying off the handle. He'd have broken ribs, a stab to the stomach. One time he turned up to the pub with a burn mark across his cheek, and Kath had hit him in the face with a hot iron. It was during this relationship that Catherine gave birth to her third daughter, Sarah. But as usual, the arrival of this new baby brought with it even more tension and violence.
Like, what? Yeah, let's have more babies. That's a good idea, you know? What the fuck?
And the relationship eventually ended with Saunders leaving town and going into hiding. Her next boyfriend was a man named John Chillingworth, who she met at the local watering hole in 1991. Within a few weeks, Kath was pregnant again, and this time it was a boy who she named Eric. By all accounts, there was less physical violence in this relationship from Kath. Chillingworth was a large man and a drinker. If he was hit, he would hit back. Testimony from Catherine's daughters suggests that he was frequently violent towards them and their mother, although John does deny this. Either way, it was a very toxic partnership, and in 1993, Catherine began to have an affair with a man named John Price. Some months later, she kicked John Chillingworth out, and she began to see John Price more seriously. John Price worked at Aberdeen's Howick mine. He had 3 children from a previous marriage. In 1995, Catherine moved into John Price's home on St. Andrew Street. The household now included 3 of Catherine's children, 15-year-old Natasha, 7-year-old Sarah, and 4-year-old Eric. Additionally, there was John Price's second child, Rosemary, who lived with him. His eldest son, Jonathan, had moved out to get his own place, and his youngest daughter still lived with his ex-wife. Although she lived in John's house, Catherine Knight still owned her old place, and she would stay there quite a lot, mostly because they would have arguments and she would move out. Her house was decorated exactly how she wanted it. She had a thing for old farm and horse riding equipment and taxidermy. On the walls and ceilings, she hung saddles, rakes, mower blades, animal skins, and taxidermied animals. It looked like something from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Whenever Kath and John had a row, she would return to this place, a cluttered refuge filled with blades and dead creatures. It was around this time that Kath started hitting the bottle, and yet again her behaviour started to deteriorate. People who knew her say that she became insanely jealous. Anytime John Price spoke to another woman, she would fly off the handle, screaming and shouting. She would threaten to cut his balls off. That seemed to be a favourite threat of hers, as well as outright threatening to kill him. She would also psychologically torment John Price's children. For example, when his youngest daughter came to visit, Kath told her, completely unfounded, that John wasn't her real father. The child was distraught and John was furious. Kath seemed to be determined to drive John's children away. She was envious of any attention from him that wasn't directed at herself. The relationship was rocky. One day he'd be kicking her out of the house, telling her that he never wanted to see her again. The next day they'd be back together as if nothing had ever happened. Over the years, the violence directed towards John Price increased in intensity. He did his best to hide his bruises, but sometimes during drunken moments he would let slip to his friends down the pub about some of the things that were happening. His friend's response was often the same. "You need to leave her, John. She'll end up killing you." Kath claims that John would beat her, and most of the time when she hit him, she was acting in self-defense. The problem is, Catherine Knight had a long history of falsely accusing her partners of domestic violence, often as a way of getting herself out of trouble or just a way of getting revenge at them for something or another. This doesn't mean that he wasn't hitting her. As I say, this was an extremely troubled relationship with two people who drank heavily. It's just that we only have Kath's word for it, and her previous behaviour means that her testimony is somewhat unreliable, especially when we consider what she goes on to do next, and she made most of these accusations as a way of explaining why she did it. In 1999, during an argument, she stabbed him in the chest. This was deep enough to leave a permanent scar. This was probably his last warning. He needed to get out. Deep down, he knew that something bad was going to happen, but he just didn't listen to his intuition. By early 2000, things between Kath and John were at their worst. Over the years, she'd been trying to divide John from his ex-wife and his kids, but all of her efforts had backfired. John ended up pushing her away, not his family. She wanted to get married. She wanted part of his house. John always refused her requests. She'd also got it into her head that John Price was sexually abusing her kids, or at least she would accuse him of that during their arguments. It seems like these accusations were unfounded, but Catherine Knight was an extremely paranoid person, and she had a habit of throwing wild accusations at her partners just to hurt them. On the 29th of February in the year 2000, Catherine Knight records a home movie. At this point in her life, at 45 years of age, she is a grandmother. Her daughter Natasha recently had a baby and had moved out into her own place. In the video, Kath sits in the living room of Natasha's home with her grandchild on her lap. She sings nursery rhymes to the child. Her kids are milling around the room and she tries to get them on camera. At some point, the kids walk out of the room, and in this moment, while she's alone, Catherine says something very unusual. "I love all my children and my granddaughter. I hope to see them all." This statement, "I hope to see them all," it didn't really make sense in the context of the video, but it seems to suggest that Kath already knew that something was about to happen where she might not get to see her children again. Catherine asked Natasha to look after her kids for the nights. This was an unusual request. In fact, Kath seemed to be acting strangely in general. She was agitated and confused. Catherine and John had recently had a huge fight. It ended with Kath threatening John with a butcher's knife. In retaliation, John, she claims, grabbed her so hard that he left bruises on her breast. Before recording the video, Catherine had spent most of the day going around showing everybody her bruises. Her behaviour was so odd that day that, as she turned to leave Natasha's house, Natasha stopped her on a doorstep and said, "I hope you're not going to kill Pricey and yourself." Catherine assured her that nothing like that was going to happen, and they parted ways. She went back to her own house and stayed there till around midnight, and then she went to John's house. By this time, John Price was at home and asleep in bed. Catherine watched some TV downstairs before slipping into a black nightie and climbing into bed with him. The pair made love. John gets up to use the toilet and gets back into bed. Kath then gets out of bed. She fetches one of her boning knives and returns to the bedroom. John Price is lying on his back on the bed. He's half asleep. Kath jumps onto the bed and she starts stabbing him in the chest. Blood spatter analysis shows that he was stabbed at least 4 times here, the blood splashing up the walls with each swing of the blade. John manages to push Catherine off and he staggers out of the room into the hallway. Bloodied handprints on the wall show that he was fumbling around trying to find a light switch, at which point Catherine comes up behind him and starts stabbing him in the back. He stumbles down the hallway. All the time, Catherine continues stabbing into his body in a complete frenzy. More blood spatters the walls.
It makes you think, like, If anyone ever attacks you with a knife, your instinct, right, would just be like I was imagining the same thing. Like I would just push her off and try to run away, right? But that's stupid. She still has a knife. You don't have a knife, and you're running away. Like unless you can run a lot faster than her, probably not because you just got stabbed. Um, you have to take the knife from them. So like probably hard to remember that when if ever you're getting attacked by someone with a knife, but if ever someone attacks you with a knife, you have to take control of their arms. Yeah, anyways.
John reaches the front door. Blood on the front step and the outside door handle shows that he did briefly manage to get outside, but by this point he was so weak with blood loss that Kath easily drags him back inside the house. She pins him up against the wall and continues stabbing into his torso. Eventually he slumps to the ground and he lies dead in the hallway. The post-mortem examination revealed that Mr. Price had been stabbed at least 37 times in various parts of both the front and back of his body. Many of the wounds were deep and extended into vital organs. These included the aorta, both lungs, the liver, the stomach, the descending colon, the pancreas, and the left kidney, the lower pole of which had been virtually sliced off. His body left a huge pool of blood on the cork tiles of the hallway floor. When police eventually arrive, much of this blood is smeared and dragged through the house as John's body is dragged into another room. But we'll get to that later, because if you think this story is messed up so far, we haven't even got to the
That's what I was just gonna say. This is so messed up.
worst bit. After killing John Price, Catherine Knight takes a shower, leaving bloody footprints on the bathroom floor. She then gets dressed and drives to an ATM where, at 2:35 a.m., she withdraws $1,000 from John's bank account. Next, she drives back to her house, perhaps to pick up more butcher's knives. Then at around 3:30 a.m., she goes back to John's house. As I mentioned, she drags John's corpse down the hall into the lounge area. This is a big open space, so she's got plenty of room to work. She takes a long-bladed butcher's knife and hones it carefully with a sharpening stone. Using this razor-sharp blade, she carefully slices into his body. A long, deep incision that runs down his torso and legs, then goes across his arms and up over his head. It was carefully done, using the skills that she'd learnt in the slaughterhouse. I'll let the court documents describe what happened next. Catherine, who worked for many years as a meat slicer in abattoirs, skinned Mr. Price's body. This was carried out with considerable expertise and an obviously steady hand, so that the skin, including that of the head, face, nose, ears, neck, torso, genital organs, and legs, was removed as to form one pelt. So expertly was it done that, after the post-mortem examination, the skin was able to be re-sewn onto Mr. Price's body in a way that indicated a clear and appropriate, albeit grisly, methodology. One small segment was left in place, the skin on the left upper chest. I should also add that the piece of skin that was left on the chest was the area where he had a scar from the previous time that she'd stabbed him. She then takes John Price's skin and suspends it from a hook so that it hangs upside down in the archway between the lounge room and the kitchen. Next, she takes another knife and she removes John Price's skinless head and carries it into the kitchen. She places his head into a large stainless steel soup pot. She adds some stock, some vegetables, some water, and she turns the stove on. Then she cuts 5 large slices.
Yeah, this is one of the worst for sure. This is like top, I don't know, top 10, top 15 that I've heard. Like this is messed up.
Like steaks from John's buttocks. These she roasts in the oven with courgettes, potato, and squash. She sets 2 plates on the kitchen counter and she serves up the roasted meat and vegetables with some cabbage and gravy. Beneath each plate is a sheet of kitchen towel with the names of John's children written on it. She takes another roast steak and throws it into the backyard for the dogs to eat. I should point out that at this time in their lives, none of John's kids lived in the house anymore. His youngest still lived with his ex, and the 2 older ones had moved out to get their own places, but Kath knew that they would be visiting later that day for dinner. It's doubtful that they would ever have got as far as eating the meals. They would have had to walk past the skinned body of their father before even getting to the kitchen. But even so, just knowing what was done to him, even if they didn't enter the house at all, this whole scene seems to have been laid out to scar them for life. When she was done in the kitchen, she carefully arranges John Price's headless, skinless body on the floor of the lounge room. She places him so that his legs are crossed and one hand is draped over an empty bottle of lemon soda. She smashes up all the photographs of John. On top of one of these pictures, she places a badly spelled, blood-stained, handwritten note. The note claims that she's getting her revenge on John for sexually assaulting her daughter. Later investigations would finally...
Holy fuck, there's not one word that's that's spelled correctly. What is this? Oh my god. Yeah, so that kind of explains why she's crazy, because she's fucking retarded. Johathon. So maybe this is supposed to be Jonathan for rapping, because he's a rapper, My doubter, because he doubts her every day, and he's at her beck and call, I guess. Wow, like she doesn't know how to spell anything. That's impressive.
These allegations to be completely untrue. The following morning, neighbours noticed that John's car was still in the driveway. He hadn't left for work. For a guy who rarely took sick days, this seemed to be highly unusual, and everyone knew about the troubles that John and Kath were having. A neighbour named Anthony Keegan went over to the house and banged on the door. There was no answer. Then he spotted the blood smeared on the door handle. He called the authorities. The police arrived and they crowbarred their way into the house. Detective Robert Wells describes his first impressions upon entering the house. At first I sort of saw it and I was going, it wasn't until you go up and have a look at it. And I was just, mate, I don't know how I felt. I've done a few murders and that sort of thing, especially out west, and in violent Aboriginal situations, stabbings, things that are easy to work out. This human skin, mate, with the hair hanging down from the architrave from the butcher's hook on the other side, and it was hanging right down. The scalp, the hair, right down and just touching the floor. It took a while to register, and I thought that this is something right out of left field, right out of the ordinary. I looked into the kitchen, and there was the pot. I think Furlonger had brought it to my attention, along with the drops of blood on the floor, and he said, "The body's in there, but there's no head." So I looked in, brushed past the skin, and I could see Price's skinned body, and I said, "Mate, this is just..." You sort of lose your senses for a minute or so. You didn't have to be a brain surgeon to work out where the head was. Searching the house, they found the meals. They found the head in the soup pots and the body of John Price. They also found numerous blood-stained butcher's knives and a mug filled with melted human fat. Catherine was still in the house. They found her unconscious in another room. It was suspected that she'd taken an overdose, although later blood tests would reveal that she'd only taken a small dose of nerve pills and blood pressure tablets, way less than could have caused an overdose. She was taken to Muswell Brook Hospital, where she remained apparently in an unconscious state. When she started to recover, she seemed to be dazed, and she claimed to have no knowledge of the murder. Already she was sowing the seeds for an insanity plea. As revealed in the court documents, About 5 months before the murder, she said to her brother, Kenneth Knight, "I'm going to kill Pricey and I'm going to get away with it. I'll get away with it because I'll make out I'm mad." It's also worth noting that
You can't get away with it if you skin the body and you leave it there hanging there, you stupid cunt. Honestly, you're so fucking stupid. Like, it's a good thing most killers are retarded, you know, because if they were smart, I'm sure the smart ones we don't know about because they get away with it. But you know, they're so retarded. That's probably why they kill people because they're too stupid to understand the consequences of their fucking actions. They can't think further than their fucking hand. Oh, it blows me away, just the retardation.
although she claimed to have no memory of the murder, she was able to give a detailed account of events that happened.
Bro, you skinned the body, you planned it out. You made a meal. You wrote their names, you wrote the children's names on it. You're obviously sound of mind. You're obviously there. You're not having an episode. So you're fucking stupid.
Immediately before the murder, and she was able to tell the nurses how many tablets she'd taken after the murder. So if this was amnesia, it was highly selective. Before her trial, Catherine Knight offered to plead guilty to manslaughter. Her offer was rejected and she was charged with murder. She initially indicated that she would plead not guilty to this charge, but as the trial proceeded and the charges were formally read, she seemed to change her mind and she pled guilty to the murder
Man, look at her. You can tell. Look how fucking crazy she looks. She looks fucking demented.
of John Price. Her reason for changing her mind is unknown. During sentencing, the judge said, "The prisoner has pleaded guilty to a murder which falls into the most serious category of murders. I am satisfied beyond any doubt that such murder was premeditated. I am further satisfied that not only did she plan the murder, but she also enjoyed the horrific acts which followed in its wake as part of a ritual of death and defilement. The things that she did after the death of Mr. Price indicate cognition, volition, calm, and skill. I am satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that her evil actions were the playing out of her resentment arising out of her rejection by Mr. Price, her impending expulsion from Mr. Price's home, and his refusal to share with her his assets, particularly his home, which he wanted to retain for his children. I have no doubt that her claim to amnesia forms part of a plan to affect madness in order to escape the consequences of her acts and to provide a convenient basis on which to rely to avoid detailed questioning."
That's one good thing I find though throughout all these crime documentaries, and I'm usually really pessimistic about life and people out there, but there are a lot of good people out there, and usually the truth always does shine through. People can sniff a liar usually pretty well, and it's only the super crazy psychopaths that get away with it there, but like they still don't. And some of them, like, it drives them crazy. They feel guilty. They turn themselves in. Like I just watched one the other day that he turned himself in. He felt really guilty, but like it's crazy, man. Like it's just crazy.
By the police and escape punishment. The prison
But yeah, I forgot what I was gonna say. But yeah, the truth always shines through. That's why my whole life I've always been a very truthful person, because I know that there's little moments that it shines through. It's like, oh yeah, he's being honest. I'm always being honest because that's what I want everyone else to do. I want to live in the real world where everyone's honest, decent with each other, and you know what's going on. You don't have to worry. Like I always grew up, and everyone's like, oh, don't worry about that. Don't worry about this. Like my parents. I was like, oh, his dad cheating on mom, and my mom's like, no, don't worry about that. He would never do that. And then, oh yeah, it turns out to be true, and turns out it was like even worse. And then there's all these things that people did my whole life that it's like, yeah, I don't. People lie to my face all the time. Like literally 99% of everybody I've ever known has lied to my face, and there's the 1% of people that don't lie, and I cherish those people, and I am one of those people. My whole life it's like I want to be that person that's honest, that you can count on, that you're not like stressed out like, oh, what if they're doing this, what if they're doing that, what if they're doing this behind the scenes, what if they're just acting like they're nice. It's like, no, an honest person can't act like they are who they are, and that's what it is. And I just feel like finally, since like 2020 with COVID and all that, now people like everyone was so fake, and like follow the system, follow what everyone else thinks, and now people are finally like stopping and thinking about stuff, and being more like less, like I don't know what I'm trying to say, but things are sort of getting better now because I feel people are exposing stuff. People are going more towards truth and honesty, and which is great because the last 20 years people have been fake as fuck, and all the stars in Hollywood, all the people, everyone is fake. Like why talk to anybody? It's all fake, it's all bullshit. That's the thing. It's like you don't know what's if anything is true anymore. Like am I just living in a fake reality that the person just made up? You know, you hear all these, like a lot of these people, like they they go to jail, they get out of jail, they lie about their whole lives, and then they make a new group of friends. These friends are just like, oh, he's a good guy. They've only known him for whatever 6 months. He makes up a whole story. Oh, my family's dead. I don't have any friends. Blah blah blah. You don't know their lives, and then they gain your trust, and then they do whatever they want, and they create a whole like, so the whole, like everything you thought about that person was manipulated and created by that person. That's why I don't like meeting new people. It's like I don't really know you. It's going to take me a long time to trust you. I trust my friends that I've been friends with for 30 years. That's it. That's good enough for me. I don't need new friends. I don't like, I trust the people that I trust because they've proven to be trustworthy my whole life. And the people that haven't, you know, then it's either I don't talk to them anymore, or I don't put a lot of trust in them, or whatever. So, but it's, yeah, sorry, it's just a huge deal for me. Like honesty is a big thing, and it does have a power. It does shine through. People can see like, oh, that's a blatant lie. Like she's trying to just say it's amnesia, which is complete bullshit. There's nothing to substantiate that, and everything points towards like it was very methodically planned. So, anyways, yeah, sorry for the huge tangent there, but yeah.
The prisoner showed no mercy whatsoever to Mr. Price. The last minutes of his life must have been a time of abject terror for him, as they were a time of utter enjoyment for her. At no time during the hearing did the prisoner express any regret for what she had done or any remorse for having done it. Her attitude in that regard is consistent with her general approach to the many acts of violence which she has engaged in against her various partners, namely, they deserved it. In addition, the prisoner's history of violence, together with her flawed personality, causes me to conclude that she is without doubt a very dangerous person, and likely, if released into the community, to commit further acts of serious violence, including even murder against those who cross her, particularly males. A crime of this kind, committed by the prisoner, calls for the maximum penalty the law empowers the court to impose. Catherine Knight was sentenced to life imprisonment. All subsequent appeals to have the sentence reduced have so far failed, and she remains in Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre to this day. According to one article, she is known to the other inmates as the Nana. It says, in the 17 years since she was taken into custody, Knight has found religion, paints and knits, and acts as a queen bee, sorting out disputes among prisoners. But the prison officers never take their eyes off her. She is not allowed near knives, and she even told one of Phelps's informants that she can't have a cellmate in case she kills again. So that concludes the video, and I don't think that one video is long enough to cover the full extent of Catherine Knight's insanity. There's a lot of crazy stuff from her relationships that I didn't get to cover. Peter Laylow's book, Bloodstain, or Ryan Green's Maneater are decent sources if you want to get into more details on her life. But anyway, I hope you found the video interesting. Thank you for watching, and
Yeah, super crazy. Sorry for going on a huge tangent, but yeah, this guy's really good. Shrouded Hand. Started following him when he was at like 10K subscribers. He's blowing up. Um, yeah, you guys should definitely follow him, subscribe to him. That was really good. All right, peace.